gonna take old Long George upstairs and fuck the shit out of him.
Abby!
That's what I'm gonna do. That's my wrestling service for today.
Okay, so let's talk about what happens when American filmmakers try to make black religion scary, or sexy and scary. No, but really, how do black history and fear and a little bit of white guilt come together to somehow both sexualize and degrade black spiritual practices, specifically voodoo? In order to discuss how voodoo ended up on screen, we have to understand how it made its way to America to begin with. White people's penchant for degrading and mocking voodoo can be traced back to racist sentiments from the Haitian Revolution and classic influencers of genre cinema and literature. It's also no coincidence that voodoo practitioners have been targeted with accusations of necromancy throughout history. With respect to Haiti, white people's particular interest in mocking and devaluing their cultural practices could be due to its historical title as the only nation to successfully revolt against slavery. Prior to the Revolution, Haiti was one of the most valuable colonies in the West Indies. The revolt resulted in a bloody massacre of white men, women, and children that successfully purged chattel slavery from Haiti, a known originator of voodoo. Voodoo's connection to slave rebellions and powerful black women made the religion a natural target for white supremacy. White slave owners who fled the Revolution settled in New Orleans, bringing French-speaking black Haitians who would establish voodoo as a regular practice among black people in the region. In 1811, enslaved black people outside of New Orleans used their communal power established through voodoo to stage one of the largest rebellions in American history. The leader of the rebellion, Charles, was likely brought to America from Haiti. American media has always denigrated and sexualized voodoo. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, New Orleans newspapers drew in viewers by promising descriptions of midnight orgies and voodoo rampages. After the Civil War, former Confederates slandered voodoo practitioners in the press. They used the religion's perceived primitive and satanic nature as reason to justify segregation. White journalists also falsely claimed to have witnessed demon worship, animal sacrifice, cannibalism, nudity, and interracial orgies. These accusations had real consequences for all black people in Louisiana. Police raids and intimidation forced voodoo practitioners in America to worship in private, away from white interference. The alleged tie to cannibalism was used to justify early eugenic thought and the perceived inferiority of black people.
A contract drawn up by your attorney will do, monsieur. I should have it to review by week's end. Stop it.
In Louisiana, institutions like Plaçage heightened white patriarchal fears of a black male threat to white womanhood. The existence of a wealthy class consisting of biracial people threatened white people's supposed supremacy. Fictional narratives of voodoo expose underlying anxieties around the cohabitation of black men and white women. H.P. Lovecraft, a known shaper of horror conventions, condemned both voodoo and its practitioners. His influence on modern horror solidified the abject nature of voodoo in both literature and genre cinema. Since then, the imaginary voodoo portrayed in many American films has been a receptacle for centuries of racist cultural anxieties held by white people. This is especially obvious in films like Angel Heart and The Skeleton Key. The figure of the zombie can also be traced back to Haiti. Some narratives utilize the figure of the zombie within allegories that reference slavery. In Sugar Hill, the zombie army raised by the protagonist is coded as former enslaved people through mise-en-scène. They emerge from their swampy graves, toppling overgrown and neglected headstones, in order to enact their revenge on the same racist sentiments that oppressed them while living. The most popular portrayals embody either one or a combination of the following approaches to utilizing voodoo within a horror film: terror, revenge, or empowerment.
Get out of here!
Unsurprisingly, using voodoo to scare audiences is fairly common across the canon. To evoke terror, voodoo is primarily utilized when it has the potential to be weaponized against white people, antagonists or otherwise.
O Lord God most.
Made as a pre-code flick in 1932, White Zombie is one of the older portrayals of voodoo as terror in American filmmaking. The religion's potential to harm Madeline, the epitome of white, demure womanhood, is supposedly the film's most terrifying quality. She can be controlled as a zombie slave captured by an evil voodoo master. She even attempts to attack her heterosexual love interest. The film presents Madeline as a weak pawn, and ultimately useless until the voodoo master's spell is broken and she's returned to heterosexual subserviency. In Reginald LeBourg's 1975 film, Voodoo Island, white property developers, aka colonizers, have their plans foiled by carnivorous plants and zombies. Even in their wildest fears, the narrative allows for the two white leads to have some melodramatic scenes longing for one another, and while no black people are present in the film, the horrors are still coded as foreign and threatening to white people specifically. In Voodoo Woman, white treasure hunters, again colonizers, are threatened by a tribe in the African jungle. I guess white people's referral to Africa as one big country can be traced back pretty far. Anyways, the pretty white woman is turned into an invincible monster using voodoo. Then, because she's a pretty white woman and horror films really have a love-hate relationship with them, she betrays the mad scientist and escapes, wreaking havoc upon the natives as she goes. In the film I Eat Your Skin, affectionately known as Voodoo Bloodbath, both voodoo and zombies are first introduced as a foreign threat to whiteness. Later on in the film, the white protagonists infiltrate a voodoo cult to save one of their own. The cultists in the film are after one of the white protagonists due to her status as a blonde virgin. The valorization of white womanhood, in this film particularly, naturally degrades and renders voodoo an abject practice. One of the most shining examples of voodoo being used to evoke shock and terror is Alan Parker's film Angel Heart. In the film, voodoo is both hypersexualized and exploited to produce terror and arousal in white audiences. The film plays on America's unique talent for somewhat prematurely sexualizing child stars. Former Cosby kid Lisa Bonet stars in the film as a voodoo priestess who engages in a violent sexual encounter with the protagonist and her estranged father, Harry Angel.
Very pretty girl, Epiphany. Your name suits you.
The creators visually hypersexualize voodoo using Bonet's character by stripping her of clothing during rituals. Furthermore, animal sacrifices in darkness are used to draw terror from imaginary voodoo practices. During a particularly dark moment, Epiphany slices the neck of a chicken and allows the blood to pour over her bare chest. As the film's white male protagonist watches from a bush, she gyrates, surrounded by fire and drums, until Angel grows tired of consuming the spectacle and leaves.
Oh, shit, man. I got a thing about chickens.
The animal sacrifice evokes castration anxiety in white male characters. further rendering the religious practice as sexual and abject. Epiphany's sexuality is portrayed as dangerous and satanic. Despite this danger, she still has immense harm done to her by the narrative and the white male figures. She's raped and discarded without any consequence. Angel Heart offers a somewhat flimsy critique of racism by revealing that the main character and protagonist Harry has been behind the various gruesome murders within the narrative.
I didn't kill Fowler, and I didn't kill Toots, and I didn't kill Margaret, and I didn't kill Cruz Mark. I didn't kill no one.
It doesn't change that he's left a substantial list of violently murdered voodoo practitioners and other supporting characters. It turns out that whiteness, not voodoo, has been the murderous force throughout the film. Harry can only begin to understand the crimes he's committed by acknowledging his own role in the antagonism, rape, and murder of both black people and others. Portrayals of voodoo used for revenge often use the practice to punish unsuspecting racists or their descendants.
Don't you get uppity with me.
Uppity? With you? My dear, talking to you means I look nowhere but down.
In Sugar Hill, the main character uses voodoo to enact revenge on the racist thugs who murdered her boyfriend. At the end of the film, she achieves this goal, but has little to show for it. She's constantly degraded on the basis of her race, appearance, and gender. The racist taunts only serve to confirm the demise of the film's white antagonists. Sugar uses a zombie army comprised of former enslaved black people to avenge the death of her lover. At the end of the film, Sugar sacrifices the white woman who has antagonized her throughout the movie to the voodoo priest who aided her plot for revenge.
You dirty nigger!
With respect to blaxploitation revenge films, Sugar's catfight with the racist white woman is just the cherry on top. In rare circumstances, voodoo gives black characters the power to transform their bleak, oppressed destinies for more rewarding and empowered futures.
I'm frightened. For the first time in my life, I'm frightened. All my life, I feared nothing. And now you tell me what you are, and I accept it.
The black voodoo priestess archetype was preceded by the mammy and magical Negro tropes, which use black people's abilities to serve their white companions and masters. Voodoo priestesses represent a bolder take with respect to the sexuality of black women, as they are typically hypersexualized. Voodoo women use their powers and abject sexuality as weapons against white characters, either out of revenge, sadist pleasure, or for community safety. In Scream Blackula Scream, voodoo is initially sought out due to its healing potential, but is finally used to protect the community from a supernatural threat, a vampire. The practice is regarded as powerful, but not exploited for terrifying or evil means. It also follows the typical sexualization of women who practice voodoo. Even Blackula himself can't resist Pam Grier's appeal.
Hey, Whitey, you and your punk friends killed my man.
You know, you got one of the prettiest asses in town. I'd sure hate to see it kicked in for accusing people.
I'm not accusing you, honk. I'm passing sentence.
In Sugar Hill, voodoo allows Sugar to get revenge for the murder of her boyfriend, though she's not left with a particularly promising future at the end of the film. Throughout it, she's terrorized with sexist insults and digs at her character. Despite its shortcomings, Sugar Hill's dramatic kill scenes are meant to be empowering images for black audiences. It's notable that at the end of most of these films, practitioners of voodoo are not valorized as heroes or even regular people with individualized spiritual beliefs. Conversely, characters who practice voodoo are either killed or continue their lives practicing a persecuted faith. Most often, voodoo is used to evoke terror and desire in white audiences, and is presented as an obstacle that must be crushed or conquered by white male characters. It's American filmmakers' typical disregard for facts and distinction in favor of financial gain and notoriety. Thanks so much for listening. For more information or reading, definitely check out these references.
Oh my goodness, I'm gracious. Put out a look, I put looks on their faces. I like my coke extra white like a racist. I like my dick on demand, I'm impatient. Don't got no license, so why would I race?